Okay, welcome to the AdaptX podcast, where we have conversations with individuals building accessible businesses, advocating for inclusion, or excelling in adaptive sports. Our intention is never to speak on behalf of those with disabilities, but to provide a platform to share their voice and amplify their ideas to a more accessible world. Today, I'm joined by Ruden, an amputee, type 1 diabetic, record-holding powerlifter, motivational keynote speaker, and author of The Art of Changing Course. From being humiliated and labeled broken because of his disability to struggling with mental health and living in a non-disabled inclusive world, Chris learned to turn his obstacles into opportunities, now using his bionic arm, diabetes technology, and message of creating your world without limits to impact people around the world. This is an honor, Chris. Thanks for joining me.
Of course. Thanks for having me, man.
What initially inspired or motivated you to write this most recent book?
I think it was years of having to manage change myself and seeing that everyone manages change. It's such a universal, happening for everyone. Whether you want to or not, whether you're trying to or not. I definitely wasn't trying to make all of my struggles motivational, that's for sure. There's definitely some I could do without, and some they just kind of happen. And I find that everyone shares that universal truth of I have to change whether I want to or whether I don't, whether it happens to me or I have to be the catalyst to change. That is the one universal truth that's going to continually happen in our lives. So to me, it almost became obvious I need to figure out how to manage this effectively, or else it's going to manage me. And then I'm going to be unhappy with the life I'm left with instead of the life I'm choosing to live. So this was years of just not wanting to be a passenger in my own life.
So that change for you, would you say that the time when you became more accepting of your disability was maybe the pivotal time?
I would say I hid my disability for 17 years. I hid it in a pocket, in a glove, in long sleeves, any way I could, I hid it. My entire life revolved around hiding my disability. And it was almost like I was too disabled for normal people, quote unquote, but not disabled enough for people who didn't have the option to hide their disability. So I always felt like I was in this weird purgatory of a space. When I finally decided to stop hiding my hand and kind of made that video that I posted on YouTube, it was for me. I was at that point where I was like, I'm done hiding. I just want to get it off my chest, jump in the deep end. I didn't expect anything from it. Waking up to 7 million views on YouTube and like crazy just social media, online Reddit support. It was terrifying, but at the same time, the best thing that ever happened to me, because that jump in the deep end moment made me realize that I can swim, and I could have swam the whole time.
Yeah, it was like that burn the boats moment, right? At that point,
It really
at
was.
that point, there was really no way of going back. Not that you necessarily wanted to go back, but like those first 17 years, was it social? Was there like a specific moment or experience that kind of prevented you from being more outward with it earlier, or?
There was definitely a few, from growing up and just being in a poorer neighborhood. My parents never had money. We always struggled with money. And one specific time, a kid saw me outside playing, normal kid, just playing basketball. And she like ran away from me. And I didn't think anything of it. Her mom brought her over later that day, knocked on our door, and her mom said, hey, my daughter saw your kid and his hand, and she was really scared of it, calling him a monster. Can you just bring your kid out here and show her that he's not a monster? And like that, it seemed like a good idea, I guess, to someone, but to me, to my parents, they're like, you just want us to put our kid on display to like show that he's okay. Like, that's not okay. From that to having a girl that I had a crush on make fun of me in front of the entire class with a stapler, calling me clawboy because I have two fingers on my left hand. That was probably the first moment that I shoved my hand in my pocket. And I kept my hand in my pocket for 3 years. When I would go to the beach, when I would go anywhere, if I had my backpack on and I put my hand in my pocket, I couldn't take my backpack off unless I were asked to go to the bathroom. So my backpack would dangle there on my left side all day, unless I asked to go to the bathroom just to take my hand out of my pocket for a second to get my backpack off. it was that serious of a, this is how I have to live my life. So there's quite a few moments that kind of stacked in this, oh my God, like this disability is awful, all the way to, oh, this is just how I live. It almost became a level of acceptance, you know? A lot of people are like, oh man, that must have been really rough for you. I'm like, it wasn't. You know, I just disassociated the majority of my life to think this is life, this is normal, this is what it is.
Would your perspective have been different if you were exposed or introduced to someone with a similar disability? Or like, what's the power of representation now? Do you have kids reaching out to you with similar disabilities, or parents reaching out to you? Like, yeah, what's that relationship between representation and kind of acceptance?
So I do want to say this. If someone were to come to me at that age, I was 14 and I was a very angry kid. One disability, where I grew up, you know, my upbringing, I was an angry kid. So if someone would have tried to be super motivational speaker to me, I would have said some very not nice things. You know, I'm definitely not a positivity hippie. I can say that. But what I can say is, I wish I had someone who was just normal around me that normalized disability. Don't tell me I should wear a cape because I have less fingers. My disability is not a superpower to me, it is just a part of me. And the superpower is the choice that I make around the conditions I have or don't have. So it would have been nice to have someone who was just like cool, you know? And that's what I try to embody is when I talk with kids, whether they have disabilities or not, or anyone for that matter, I see people for who they are and not what they have. You know, I like to share this one specific story of this kid named David. I was 20 years old, just got I was starting to get my feet wet in exercise science because that was my background, what I went to school for. And this kid's mom came up to me when I was working at a gym, and she was like, "Hey, listen, my son, his name's David. I think you could work with him. You could really help him." And I was like, "Oh, what's going on?" He has cerebral palsy. He can barely walk. He can barely talk. But I just think you could really help him. Seeing what you're working out, you're doing all this stuff. So I met this kid and fell in love with him, you know. I would have to grab around his braces because he couldn't really stand, and I would help him maneuver around cones. And we attached these bands under his arms so he could almost squat, freestanding. And I would help him like kick a ball into the soccer goal, and he would miss 9 times out of 10, you know. But he celebrated every single time like he made it, and I was like, that's so cool, you know. He came home one day and he was like, "Chris, these kids are making fun of me for the way I talk and the way I walk." And I was like, "Oh, it's okay. I'll drop kick him in the throat." You know, like before I could finish my threat, though, he pretty much said like, "Oh, it's okay. They don't define me." You know. And I was like, "Man, this kid's 11 years old. And he learned something that took me almost 20 years to learn." You know. And I was still struggling with at the time. I was still hiding my hand when I was working with him. So fast forward a year later, he ran on the beach for the first time, and his parents, they were doing a lot of different therapies with him, but they really credit the fact that I saw him for David and I didn't see him for patient number 47. That I treated him like a person and not a condition. So that's what I aspire to do is when I talk with people with disabilities or anyone facing problems, obstacles, you know, treating people for who they truly are and not what they're experiencing or what they have experienced, that's so important to me.
Yeah, that's pretty central to like our AdaptX curriculum that we teach too, because I think there's that tendency to want to know every component of the medical model of disability,
Hmm.
and you want to learn about cerebral palsy. And you might have had something similar where, like, when I opened my gym, when I got my first client with multiple sclerosis, I went home and I did everything I could to learn about MS, and because I wanted to be able to help them in the most effective way possible. So you might have pursued trying to learn about cerebral palsy, learn about contractures, learn about different GM FCS levels, and but at the end of the day, like, you can understand the diagnosis, but that plays such a small role in someone's experience as a
It
whole.
really does. It
So it's
really
like,
does.
yeah, so kind of the mantra of like understand the diagnosis, but train the individual is kind of
Love that.
one of our key, like, I guess, empathetic like pillars to a degree.
Absolutely
So
love that. And you can replace that word train with communicate, and
yeah.
that is an entire model of communication and interactivity with people, whether it's at a job or anything. It doesn't just stop at training. That's just one component of a very large concept of working with people, not with their conditions, so to speak, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Was fitness a coping mechanism for you? I know some people get into it as a way of handling stressors and other things going on in their life. So you pursued exercise science. When did fitness become a large part of your life?
So I was always, I think one of my biggest coping mechanisms was being petty, and it was being competitive. So if someone told me I couldn't, that was the worst thing you could ever tell me. Like, I joke that if I'm walking next to an old person, they don't know we're racing, but I'm winning. You know, like I was so competitive. So I remember a doctor and a few like people telling me you can't really work out like that. You know, that's not really, it's not going to work. And I would see these bodybuilding magazines and I was like, that's so cool. I loved the symmetry, but obviously I'm asymmetrical by default. So people are like, yeah, that's just not for you. Try something else. And I was like, no, no. So I played drums for 6 years. I had a fingerless glove that I wore to hide my hand, but it turns out you could shove a drumstick through the finger hole of one of those gloves. And I played competitively on marching band and drum set and all kinds of stuff. I break danced. I did like every weird sport you could do, but sports. Like I didn't really do sports. I did martial arts, but nothing really fueled me like the gym because I walked into a gym. I remember the first gym I ever walked into. I came up with the idea. I was like, oh my God, I'm a one-handed guy living in a two-handed world. Everything, any machine that was not unilateral, which I didn't understand at the time, I would push and then my right would keep pushing, but my left locked out because my arm is 4 inches shorter as well. So I was like, this doesn't feel right. I didn't understand the idea of imbalance or anything like that, but I just knew it didn't feel right. You know, I was doing pull-ups and using my residual limb, and I was like, my spine was twisted, and I'm like, this just doesn't feel right. So I was like, how can I make this better? And that curiosity turned into a book, inevitably, which I talk about curiosity versus certainty a lot. But I loved the gym because I was like, I know I can find a way to do this. I was like so driven to find a way to do this. And I just felt great. I remember I was always in band camp, you know, but one of the second year I was in band camp, everyone knew me as a skinny little small kid because I was 140 pounds, you know. The next year I had abs. And I remember we were walking around the track and I didn't have a shirt on. And this girl who would play flute, you know, she was like, when did Chris get abs? You know, and that I remember that moment specifically. I was like, people see. Okay, people are like kind of seeing me now. And that got my addiction, but bodybuilding takes years and years and years. So I got stronger, and my buddy introduced me to powerlifting, and it just took off from there.
What modifications or adjustments did you make in the gym to train bilaterally or to train more symmetrically?
So I had a few different really good influences. In high school, I just had a buddy who we were just figuring out stuff, and I used the leg cuff strap on my arm, on my wrist, and I was able to do like flies, and I was able to do raises, and I was able to do a lot of stuff. I would still kind of hook my left hand around it, which shortened, you know, the moment arm, and like that got a little bit more complicated, but it wasn't until I got to college and I eventually got into exercise science that Mike Zordos, pretty much father of daily undulating periodization, and he has a bunch of studies with a bunch of other cool people. Uh, he and I became really good friends, and I was lifting at that time. He had a like 8x8 storage facility with a singular squat rack, and we would all go there. We would squat and then go outside, you know, and like you'd have to wait outside. We came up with this idea for a hook, and I had a company elongate the hook. So it was a what's it called? I can't think of the name of the hook, but I'll come up with it. We elongated the straps for it so it evened me out, and I was able to deadlift. And I got to deadlift, you know, 135, 225, 315. Once I got into 405, it started slipping a little bit, and I didn't want to go above the elbow because I thought it was cheating. So I found ways to create more contact force. I used a wrist strap over top of it, and that got me closer to like 550. Once I got to the 600s, that's when I needed even more support. So I used skin tack spray on my skin before I put anything on there. And that got me inevitably all the way up to 675 deadlift at 190. And that blood would pool out of my residual limb, and it was just like crazy. But it was really epic powerlifting competitions, and I won 7 of my meets against normal people, you know, and I was able to deadlift 675. That was like the heaviest I ever lifted, but I hit 640 at the Arnold in front of like 20,000 people, and that was like probably the coolest moment ever.
I would imagine. Did you have to bench in those meets too, or were they
Yeah,
deadlift
in
specific to
those
you?
meets I benched as well. With benching, I just balanced it on my residual limb. So I used to bench with the bar being straight, but my back being rotated. And then I was like, why am I focused on the aesthetics of the bench instead of the actual bench itself? So when I corrected my back, I benched with the bar being slightly offset, but I was able to maintain position, lockout, and everything was good. I got to a 385 bench, and then squat, I got to a 615 squat. So all of this was sub 200 pounds. I usually competed at 181. I think the last one I did was 198, but yeah, I loved powerlifting for so long because I found ways to get really strong. When people saw me deadlift, that was my thing. That was my claim to fame. Social media, so many people posted those videos, and it was just it was a wild time.
What's your relationship with fitness like now, or goals, I guess?
I originally wanted to bodybuild, but I knew like I had years and years and years to change my body, and my biggest worry was people seeing my hand. In bodybuilding is you see everything. You're judged on the way you look, you know, so that is such a weird 360-degree change like of life. 2 years ago, I competed in my first ever bodybuilding competition. I finally did it, focused on it, and I won. I got first place against, you know, again, non-disabled people, and I checked that off. And it was weird to check off something you thought you'd never do, but you always wanted to. And then you're like, what do I do now?
Yeah.
So now I was bodybuilding kind of just for fun on myself. I picked up some athletic training lately. I am training for a specific, uh, I guess I can say TV show that I'm not allowed to say what it is, but at the end of this year, everyone will find that out. And I have a new goal to say, and it's very different. And to be honest, I have to throw it out there. I am playing pickleball, and it's the most fun thing I've ever done. And I feel so old saying that, but I love it, and it's so much fun. So I would never have thought I would be here from all the things I've done, but I think allowing yourself to be flexible enough to have fun and enjoy different methods of fitness or different methods of wellness, you owe it to yourself to not be one-dimensional, you know?
Yeah. From a 675 deadlift to a
To
pickleball
pickleball.
to pickleball.
That is the
A
real,
motivational story.
that is something, you know?
So your new book, recently published. Listened to it over the past week while I was slogging some miles, getting ready for Boston this April. One thing that stood out to me the most were the quadrants, quadrant model you talked about, as well as Lewin's 3-step model of change. Maybe starting with the latter, can you explain to listeners, I guess, maybe, how do I want to phrase this? Maybe what Lewin's model of change is, 3-step model of change, or kind of when you learned about that and how you applied it to your life?
Absolutely. So, as I'm a professional speaker, so I speak on overcoming adversity, change, and disability inclusion. The change models, there is organizational change management, which is super fancy and it can get pretty complicated, but the idea of change applies to everyone. So, Lewin's 3-step model of change, how I can explain it to anyone listening would be picture an ice cube, and that's usually people's set in stone beliefs as they are today, whether they are true or untrue. They are unchanging unless you change the state of that ice cube. So the first step is to unfreeze that and go back to a liquid, which is more moldable and changeable. Then you change the format of that thought or that belief or that feeling or that habit. And that's the second step, is forming it into something more effective or more better for you or more relevant to the current situation. The third would be to refreeze that new shape into a more effective habit or belief or thought. And to keep that frozen in its new shape, you have to maintain that temperature or maintain that habit. So to go through these changes, you have to recognize that something has to change in the first place. You have to be willing to do the changes that need to happen. And then you have to be willing to maintain or sustain that change. And I think that's probably the hardest part, is sustaining the change. Everyone is willing to start. Very few are willing to keep going or finish because it's hard. We always want to go back to our original design, back to what's comfortable, back to what's familiar, back to what we're really good at, even if it produces really bad results. That can be overeating, that can be negative thought processes, that can be toxic relationships. We have to resist the idea of going back to what's familiar. And the only way we can do that is by reinforcing the new habits, the new shape, or the new beliefs. So for me, it was really hard to one, take my glove off and like be more comfortable with being public with a disability I hid for so long. I didn't even realize, a friend pointed out to me, I had taken my glove off and I was more comfortable. And a lot of times we reward ourselves. We're like, oh, we're doing more than we used to. And that's nice and all, but it's almost like I had if someone said I had an ex and they treated me really, really bad, and now I got a new partner and they only treat me a little bit bad. And you're like, but it's way less than the other one, but it's nowhere near where you should be. So we almost reward ourselves for doing half the work. I was putting my phone on top of my hand constantly. And I didn't realize it. I was using that to hide my hand. Even though I wasn't wearing the glove anymore, I wasn't hiding. I just naturally felt comfortable keeping my phone there. And a buddy of mine pointed out, he's like, hey, do you do that to hide? And I was like, oh, damn. Maybe I do. But we have to watch those moments. So the idea of managing change it's so difficult because it's easier to manage change when it's thrust on you. If you get fired, you have to manage change. You're not going to work. But if you need to leave a job, that it's not bad, but it's not good. It's not bad enough to leave, but it's not good enough to stay. You have to be the one to change that. You have to be one to change that shape. You have to be the one to, sustain that change. That could be a job, a person, a belief, a thought. It's really hard to be your own change catalyst, but you have to recognize when it's important to do that, and you have to weigh the pros and cons. Is it more effective for you to stay, or is it more effective for you to change? Effectiveness, not comfortability, not anything, not familiarity, effectiveness.
Yeah, the shape, I think, as I was reading, that I kind of reflected on my own experience is this like persona I've adopted that I'm the one that's going to work more and harder than everyone else. And not in some motivational hustle culture type of thing, but I've more or less worked every day for the last 9 years in some capacity on like on my different businesses and such. And like I kind of embodied this idea of like I was going to be up and working immediately and I was going to work late. And I now with a 1 and a 2 year old, my perspective and my I guess priorities have shifted in a way where I don't want to work through these next 10 years when I'm the most important person in my kid's life just
Yep.
so I can give them something better in the future financially, whatever it might be. But it's been hard for me to kind of break from this like persona that I've created for myself, and I know that no one cares. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like there's this thing like, oh, people know me as the one that's like always working, always at the gym working and stuff like that, but I realize no one really cares.
Yeah.
I just can't like kind of dissociate with that I guess perspective I've adopted.
I think part of it is, I talk about it in my book too, language is so important. And not that you did it on purpose, but even you just said you can't, and you can. It's possible. It's hard, but it's possible. Um, I, I, I can't deadlift 675 right now. If I dedicated the next year and a half to getting back to where I was, I could. But the work is laid out. It's not easy. It's not quick. It's not a matter of possibility. It's a matter about like, are you doing the work every single time that thought comes up? Are you combating that with something effective or something different? Are you reframing that? And I find so many people screw themselves out of a different life because of simply the language they use. People say, "Oh, I'm just lazy. I'm just lazy. I'm always lazy." No. You're not lazy. You have been lazy in the past, but it's not who you are, it's what you did in the past because you have a chance right now in every moment moving forward to not be lazy. We have to separate old habits from current identities. And a lot of us are attached to former identities and former habits, allowing us to be like, oh no, that's who I still am. No, that's who you're choosing to be right now. Because every single moment, even with your example, one, we often think if you're a competitive person, which I know you are, if we are competitive people, we often think we're competing for awards that don't exist, whether that's hustling, working, being the hardest working in the room, I had the same mindset too. I want to be the hardest working in the room, but I realized that's not what you want. You want the result that comes from what you think being the hardest person in the room is. Because if someone gave you $100 billion to endlessly pour into the disability community and help them with zero stress, you'd take that gladly. You're like, no, I'm going to continue to work. Hell no. You want the benefit, and everyone does. No one wants to learn about RPE. People want abs. No one wants to learn about gluconeogenesis. They want to be shredded. No one wants the process. They want the end benefit, which is why marketing is all about using end benefit to get people to where they want to be. If you have Coach A who tells me we're going to run at 3.2 miles an hour at a 5.7 incline for the next 45 days, and Coach B who's like, I'm going to get you extremely strong in the next 2 weeks, I'm going with Coach B, even though both methods might be the same. So I think making sure we identify with what's the end benefit that we truly want, and are these thoughts, beliefs, habits, actions contributing to the end benefit that you truly want? I try and use that filter all the time. Is where am I trying to go? I have to be clear on that. And is what I'm doing and how I'm thinking contributing to where I want to go? Yes or no? You know the answer. And you have to be honest with yourself. I talk about radical honesty in my book, but you, until you're extremely aware, you're never going to change that first shape. Awareness, I know it sounds super cliche, but you have to be honest with yourself and say, am I speaking the truth to myself? Am I telling myself what I actually want, or am I just becoming a product of what everyone has told me I should be?
I feel like I love the process though. Like when you deadlifted 675 or whatever, you were like, okay, that's cool. It's over now. And it was fleeting, but all those workouts that you did leading up to it, I'm sure you enjoyed those
Oh
as
yeah, they were
well.
fun in the process, and there
Yeah,
was moments that sucked. Don't get me wrong. There's
right.
always
There always
days.
is. Yeah, yeah,
There's
yeah.
always days. We've. I'm sure you've heard the phrase "progress isn't linear." Happiness isn't linear. Like nothing about life is linear, but consistency will get you closer than doing nothing. That's inevitable,
Yeah, but like I love my work.
and that's fantastic.
If I was given the opportunity to watch Netflix or work on one of the projects I'm working on, niches I'm working on, I would choose the latter. So it's like I feel like some people are like, "Oh, you got to take a day off, you got to stop, you got to do this" because that's what they want to do. That's not really
And
what I
yeah,
that's not
that's
really what I
them
want to do.
projecting. Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as you find fulfillment, again, and that comes down to honesty. If you truly find fulfillment in that, there is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. There's only a problem when the end goal doesn't align with the current action. If you want to be the best possible parent, but you're like, I don't see my kid for 4 years at a time, like, okay, something is not really
Right.
matching up there. But if you can be everything you need to be and still enjoy the quality of life and process, if you still derive that, there is no problem whatsoever. My book is about changing course, but there is no need to change if change is not needed. We don't change just because. If you find fulfillment in what you're doing and there are no problems, don't create them. There are always ways to optimize. I don't align with the idea of don't fix what's not broken, because if that was true, you probably would have a horse instead of a car, and you would probably have candles instead of electricity. So it's not about don't fix what's not broken. It's like, how can I optimize the way I currently do things so that I can enjoy the best possible quality of life? It
Yeah.
always comes down to quality of life.
Yeah, I think the thing I'm focusing on or kind of the trajectory is like doing a better job of delegating, doing a better job of figuring out what tasks can be accomplished by someone else so I can work on the higher level stuff.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of the direction I have to go in. But in the book, you talk about identifying when you're stuck and kind of getting out of that shape. How do you know when to pivot, when to change course, or when to persevere? Like, I guess, what's the difference between being stuck and being and persevering through something? We are grateful for the support of our first show sponsor. Resolution Fitness offers leading brand health club equipment and accessories for residential and commercial use. In addition to traditional exercise equipment, they specialize in adaptive fitness products and wheelchair accessible machines. If you're interested in outfitting your fitness facility or home gym to be more accessible, visit www.resolutionfitness.ca or the link in the show notes below.
Yeah, I think if only there was a perfect model that would tell you when is what, a unique identifier. It's ultimately down to a choice. For me, you kind of mentioned it too. I had grown this identity of I'm Chris the powerlifter. I was Chris the diabetic disabled powerlifter. That was my whole thing. Everyone knew me on social media. I grew thousands and thousands of followers because of Chris the diabetic powerlifter. I hit that 675 goal, which was my goal. And then every day in the gym after I hit that goal, started to get worse and worse. I hated the idea of powerlifting. I hated the idea of doing 5 sets of 10. I was like, if I do 5 sets of 10 of anything else, I'm done with this. I hated the idea of just repetitive, less, more volume, less exercise variation. Like it just started to really bog me down. And I was like, but I got to do it because I'm Chris the powerlifter. But I got to do it because I'm Chris the powerlifter. And I'm like, got to persevere through. That wasn't one of those moments. I had to have that like kind of come to Jesus moment where I was like, I don't think I want to do this anymore, but I can't quit. That's language because I could quit. I could change and I needed to change, but I was resisting that change. In changing and going to bodybuilding, I had so much fun, more like invigorating workouts, but more like I felt at peace accepting that that chapter of my life was over and I wanted to do a new chapter. The same thing happened with bodybuilding. It was a little bit more short-lived because I like got to the goal quickly. And I was like, man, what do I do now? I need to do something. I'm like, do I need to do something? Can't we just exist? You know, like you got to have more. I have goals in my business. I have goals in my life. But moving from like bodybuilding to like just working out for me, that was a big shift too. I think you have to identify, you have to be honest with yourself enough to say, is this fulfilling? Is this what I truly want? Or is it this sunk cost fallacy where I've already invested so much time that I can't quit now? So many people are committing down a road because they've sunk time into it and they think that time requires more time. You know, it happens with stocks all the time. You're like, I lost $500, but I've invested for so long, I can't keep going. Tomorrow I lost $600. Tomorrow I lost $700. How much are you willing to lose until you realize, hey, I kind of knew from the beginning this wasn't working, but I stuck it out because I'm stubborn. There's no respect in persevering down a lane you shouldn't be in. And I think you have to be honest with yourself to say, this isn't what I really want. I know this isn't really good. And ask yourself, displace yourself for a second. If this was my best friend, my husband, my spouse, my partner, what would I tell them to do? From the outside looking in. We're often so much more clear when we see someone else going through the same problem than we are in our own problem.
Yeah.
You remove your name, put someone else's name, you're like, oh, do this, 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 and this. It comes back to you. You're like, wait a minute. Wait, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's so much easier to point fingers, you know, but I think that's a useful tool that I use. Like if I was giving someone advice in my same position, what would I tell them to do? It's crazy how quick the answer comes.
Is that one of the messages that you focus on with corporate speaking? Like, what do you hope the audience gets? Because you said the hardest part of that Lewin's three-step model was the action and the maintenance of it. And I assume that's one of the biggest hurdles with motivational speaking is people feel excited about it for a day or two, but how can they sustain that change for weeks and months to come? So like, what are your main objectives when you deliver a speech? How do you prepare for that speech? How do you get to know the audience? Kind of what's your whole process for that?
So I think that's what's currently and has been exciting me for so long is how can I optimize the way messages are received and implemented and sustained? And I've realized that speaking alone is not enough. Doing an event once a year for a company is not enough. Part of that is the performance side of things where it's a lot of fun, it's an engaging, and I love figuring out how to get messages to stick better. So understanding stories, you know, get people to remember things, but engagement gets people to really like never forget things. But not forgetting something and implementing something are very different. I've realized that if someone is willing to hire me to speak on stage, they're probably willing to hire me to get on some calls with their team. They're probably willing to bring me on in a consulting capacity. And I've started to do that with a lot more companies where instead of doing a one-off speaking gig, which is still really good money, I'm able to work with a company for a year. And that's where we have the follow-ups, the touch points, the keeping you on track, doing what you need to do. And that depends on what it is, whether it's in the disability inclusion side of things around accessibility, or if it's around change management, or even sales, the sales process and keeping the morale up enough to keep going. I talk a lot about burnout, and one of the big messages is burnout isn't usually because you're doing too much, it's because you forgot the work that you do matters. So reframing people to say like, okay, you're working too much on the emails and the tasks in your head, and you're forgetting that those emails are going to people, and those people have lives, and those lives matter. So when we reframe things, we can instantly give ourselves more energy or more efficacy to do the things we're already doing on a daily basis with a little bit more intention. And that's kind of what I like to do, but I realize it requires multiple touch points. If you told someone to go to the gym and just squat, they're like, squat is the king of exercises. Yeah, but if the squat gives you pain, or you don't enjoy the squat, or that's all you're doing, you need a little bit more. I'm sure you can get by, but there are other components that could help make it a little bit more optimal, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What's been the most memorable or impactful speaking engagement that you can kind of recall?
I would definitely say it's selfish, but it was the pivotal moment for me to stop hiding my hand. I was speaking at Disney Coronado Springs. There was like 2,000 diabetics and families of diabetics at this event. And I had spent all day with this one family, specifically this girl had just got diagnosed. And I bought her a hat and stuff, and it was so cool because I was there for a week-long event. It was super, super awesome with all these families. She followed me around like a puppy. She was like 11 years old. And we were walking down this long corridor. I was still hiding my hand. At the beginning of my speaking career, I was still hiding my hand on stage, you know? We were walking down this corridor, and she grabs my hand over my glove. And I just like froze. I'll never forget this moment. And she's just like swinging it like a kid would, you know? And she looks over at me and she's like, "It's okay. You don't have to hide around me." And that wrecked me in the best way possible. And it made me think there was thousands of people there to hear me speak, but only one little girl actually saw me and chose to like see me, you know? And I remember giving that speech knowing like this is going to be the last time on stage that I hide my disability. I just knew like something had to change. Like it was such a pivotal moment for me to realize like not all motivation comes from the celebrities or the heroes or the successful bros of entrepreneurship. And like sometimes it's from the most genuine people, kids, just seeing something in you that you don't even see in you, which is why like what you do working with people with disabilities or working with any type of person that's usually not given a voice, everyone has impact, everyone is an influencer, you know, everyone has the ability to influence. I was super lucky because maybe 6 7 years after that happened, I was in the state that they live in, and I stopped by that family's house, and I used that specific story in a speaking competition that I won. I showed it to the girl. She didn't know that, she didn't remember that conversation. And she was like, "Oh my God, that little girl must be so excited. Like, that's so crazy. I hope she knows." And I was like, "That little girl is you." And she lost it, like, lost her mind. The whole family was crying. Like, it was a crazy moment, but it was so cool to see, like, influence, inspiration can come from anywhere. So, anyone listening, I highly encourage you. You never know who you can, like, truly change their life. That girl changed my life without even knowing.
Seems to be a theme in these stories here that it's been kids in the gym and
It
kids in
really is.
speaking engagements
I
that
I
are.
always say that like kids are more of the motivation and inspiration for me than like any adult or anything like that because I see kids and I'm like I put myself in their shoes and I see some kids who are just excited and hopeful and I'm like almost jealous. I'm like I wish I had that feeling. You know, I was so busy fighting my disability or my identity. I was so busy fighting it. So I see them and I'm like protect them at all costs, you know?
Yeah, I try to communicate to our members, the ones without disabilities, like how much value can be drawn from, I don't know, you could call it volunteerism, I guess, but like my life was instantly changed when I volunteered at Special Olympics for the first time. I had no disability exposure prior to that. My mom made me go help out at this unified basketball program, met some kid, and I was just immediately drawn to how positive and excited he was and just how
I
thankful he
love
was
that.
for my time. And so it's like, I guess you never know how quickly your life's going to kind of course correct and change. Like, I want to be an audio engineer up until that point, and then it was like, from then on, it was like, okay, special education, fitness, like, I need to combine these two things that I like. So,
Isn't that wild? Like
yeah.
that's so wild. But it's important for people to go layers enough deep because if you had just saw the event, it would have been impactful. But like you said, you met a kid, you met a person,
Yeah.
and you learned a person's story. Like it went from Special Olympics, which is this ominous thing, to like the kid or the person, the
Yeah.
name, the story. So it's so important to get close enough to whatever you're doing, whether it's like working out or business or your life, get close enough to see what truly matters and don't zoom out so far that you can't really see the individual or the story.
What do people get wrong about inclusion or accessibility?
That it's a one-time thing, that it's a I did it thing, not I do it thing. Inclusion is a practice that, if done correctly from the start, universal design helps everyone. Uh, uh, I'm sure you've seen the meme or whatever that is the ramp with the snow. I posted it on my LinkedIn a while back, but it's such a good example of like a kid with a wheelchair waiting to use the ramp, but the guy hasn't shoveled the snow off. He's like, I'm shoveling the stairs snow first, so the kids could get up. And the kid with the wheelchair is like, well, if you shoveled the snow off the ramp, everyone can get up, you know? And whether it's ramps or captions or glasses or automatic doors, there's so many forms of accessibility that are in everyone's life that benefit you and me, that benefit people who don't require the accessibility component. But if we start with accessibility first, if we start with inclusion first, everyone's included from the start. I hate the idea that we have shrunk normalcy to excluding people with disabilities, even though people with disabilities are a normal part of society and always have been. But it's because of our limited view of what's normal that people with disabilities are on the outside of it. It's only because of what we've defined as normal and not because what's actually normal. If we recognized the normalcy of disability from the start, no one would be on the outside. And I truly believe that.
I mean, one of my biggest global, larger scale goals is just how can the fitness industry be more inclusive and accessible? How can gyms be a place of comfort and confidence for people with disabilities as well? And I think, I mean, kind of going off of what you said there, it's like inclusion's not a weekend of volunteering with Special Olympics. It's not like going to some charitable event. And it's just too often, like, I feel like so many organizations that serve people with disabilities are charities. And so people have just adopted this perspective of giving to someone with a disability is a charitable endeavor.
Yeah,
It's not
it
like a
is the
level
charity
playing
model.
field. Yeah, and it is a charity model. So it's I just wonder, like, what do you think could be done for the fitness industry specifically to make
So many things.
gyms more inclusive and accessible?
So many things. Starting from the design phase, just enough room for people to maneuver. This is not every gym should be Spirit Airlines, where you maximize every drop of space to get as many machines in there as possible. Uh, think about maneuverability, whether it's wheelchairs or just people who want more room. In general, whether you have a disability or not, when you go into a crammed space, you don't like it. You don't like it. It's not nice. So that's one thing. Having attachments and having unilateral machines, that is such a benefit for everyone. Athletes, people with disabilities, everyone benefits from unilateral capability machines. It's more options anyways. Um, Attachments is such a huge piece for me that's so cheap. If every gym just had a few more attachments, whether it's single nylon handles or single longer nylon handles, just think a little bit past like how could a person with less arms, less legs use something, but could also benefit everyone else. More attachments means more possibility for training. There are so many factors that a simple training program, whether you use anything that's already out there with like certifications or continuing education for your trainers and gym members, why are we excluding 25% of the population? You don't have to be a business major to recognize you would never want to exclude 25% of a population that could be profitable. The disability inclusion space, the disabled space, is a $13 trillion market. Why would you ignore that amount of money by simply not having access? Or flipping that, by having access, you open up an entirely new market. The
Yeah.
business case for disability inclusion is insane, especially for gyms. People see the data that currently exists and they're like, oh, well, people with disabilities are less likely to use gyms. What happens if we flip that philosophy? What happens if gyms were more inclusive to people with disabilities? People with disabilities would be more likely to use gyms,
Yeah, yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. It's not for lack of desire. It's for lack of
Lack of
opportunity.
access.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
access.
lack of
Yeah,
opportunity,
yeah,
lack of inclusion, lack of belonging.
yeah,
Um, Giving people opportunities and being a little bit more vocal about that. Take a step out of what you've always done. If you do what you've always done, you get what you always got. We recognize that. But maybe we could invite more people. Just being vocal about it would give people permission to try.
yeah. Yeah, I've been writing something on the business and economic case for inclusion in the fitness industry, and it kind of goes off of some of those metrics that you just shared. Because I think people think that accessibility is a high expense, low ROI
Yep. And it's the
modification.
complete opposite of that
Yeah,
because we recognize there's so much data by Accenture and so many different
right.
consulting companies that put out average expense of accessibility is $500 or less, even free, when it comes to design. And it's more expensive to retrofit something than it is to do it from the start. So
Right.
there's a huge business case. There's a huge humanity case. It's just I hope that people start seeing more of that and that more organizations start investing in that.
Yeah. And hopefully the change in administration and everything that's going on doesn't stall that process, because I feel like we were making good
Yes.
progress in some areas over the last couple of years, and hopefully that can continue. And it's probably, I like to think it's up to the individuals more than any sort of government
Yeah.
entity. So hopefully the collective population and group of people with disabilities and advocates of those with disabilities can continue to make that progress.
Absolutely.
What are you most excited about over the next few months, over the next year?
So I have a big TV show that's coming out and it's like really cool. I'm excited for that personally. I have a lot of speaking business that's coming through this year, which is really exciting. I'm working with another disability inclusion expert. His name's Dustin, on a business for other speakers, trying to build the business of speaking, which a lot of people want to speak. They're not sure how to get paid. Like, how do you go from not making money speaking to making a few $1,000s speaking to getting to where we are, getting $10,000, $15,000 per talk? It's very possible. It's very probable, and that's not even the upper end of speaking. But we never had anyone to show us that, so we're kind of creating that, and I'm very excited for that. Very excited to kind of create that and help other speakers. I think the true like test of leadership and success and all of that is doing things yourself and then realizing you can now teach what you wanted most. That is such a full circle moment that I love.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I had a similar thing. And like when I first started making what turned into AdaptX, it was just for my own, like I was just trying to learn. I was making presentations because I felt like that was the best way for me to learn myself personally. And then other people wanted it. And now it's a curriculum that
Love
other
that.
fitness
It's
professionals will
so
take.
cool.
So it's like, yeah, yeah. So that hopefully has a small footprint on inclusive fitness and adaptive fitness. But we'll include things in the show notes. But best way for people to connect with you: LinkedIn, website, socials.
LinkedIn, yeah, Chris Ruden, everything at Chris Ruden. Website is chrisruden.com. So I'm very communicative. So if you ever have questions or you want to just talk, shoot me a message, and I'm here for that.
Awesome. And we'll include a link to order your
Cool.
books, I guess I should say, multiple books in the show notes as well. Strongly recommend that. But Chris, thanks so much. It's been an honor to talk to someone I've followed
Of
for a long
course.
time. So
I appreciate you, man. And thanks for having this conversation. And thanks what you're doing. Like what you're doing to the community. If I would have had access to someone like you in the beginning, I don't even know where I would be, but I know it would have been much appreciated to have someone take the time to see me and recognize I might need a few different adaptations that if I wouldn't have found those adaptations by myself, I might not have committed to the gym, which was the start of where I'm at now. So thank you.
Yeah, powerful. Thank you for listening to the AdaptX podcast. Our effort to amplify the ideas of our guests and create more inclusive and accessible industries is futile unless these episodes reach a larger audience. If you enjoyed our discussion today, please leave us a rating or a review on whichever platform you use. And if you would like to learn more about AdaptX, the course that we teach to health and fitness professionals and the projects that our organization is working on, you can subscribe to our newsletter through our website, www.adaptx.org. Until next Monday.